The Blackstone Ranch sat alone in the middle of nowhere. For 3 long years, no one wanted to buy it. The land stretched out for 2,400 acres across the Montana plains, but it looked dead and empty. Brown grass covered most of the ground. The old farmhouse had holes in the roof that let rain pour inside. The barn doors hung loose on broken hinges, creaking in the wind like a ghost story. Sarah Mitchell drove her car down the dusty road to the ranch one more time. She was the real estate agent trying to sell this place. Her job was to find someone who would buy it, but every person who came to look at the ranch left quickly. They all said the same thing. Something was wrong with this land. Sarah parked her car near the old house and got out. The hot summer sun beat down on her shoulders. She walked around the property, looking at all the problems. The well had run dry years ago. The fences were falling down. Weeds grew everywhere. Even the soil looked sick and gray. The price had started at $500,000 3 years ago. That seemed fair for so much land. But months went by with no buyers. Sarah dropped the price to $400,000, then $300,000. Still nothing. People would drive out to see it, take one look, and drive away fast. The problem was not just how the ranch looked. The real problem was its history. Everyone in the area knew the stories about this place. Bad luck followed anyone who tried to farm here. 5 different families had owned this ranch in the past 20 years. All of them had failed. The first family was the Johnsons. They bought the ranch in 2004 with big dreams. They wanted to raise cattle and grow crops, but their cattle got sick and died. Their crops failed year after year. After 3 years, they lost all their money and had to sell. Next came the Wilson brothers in 2007. They were sure they could make the ranch work. They brought in new equipment and hired workers. But everything went wrong. Machines broke down for no reason. Workers quit after strange accidents. The brothers gave up after just 18 months. The Martinez family tried next in 2009. They were experienced farmers from California. They thought Montana would be perfect for their organic vegetables. But the plants would not grow in the soil. Even with fertilizer and special care, everything died. They lost their life savings in 2 years. After that came the Henderson Corporation in 2012. This big company wanted to turn the ranch into a housing development. They brought in bulldozers and started clearing land. But the workers kept finding problems. The ground was too soft in some places, too hard in others. The company spent millions of dollars and never built a single house. They walked away from the project in 2014. The last owners were the Young family in 2016. They bought the ranch for almost nothing, thinking they could fix it up. But within 6 months, strange things started happening. Their truck tires would go flat every morning. Tools disappeared from the barn. The house made weird noises at night. Mrs. Young said she felt like someone was watching her all the time. They moved out before winter came. After the Youngs left, the ranch sat empty. The bank took it back and wanted to sell it fast. That is when Sarah got the job to find a buyer. She thought it would be easy. The price was now down to just $50,000. That was almost nothing for so much land, but the local people knew better. They whispered stories about the ranch when they thought no one was listening. Some said the land was cursed by old Native American spirits. Others believed the soil was poisoned somehow. A few people claimed they had seen strange lights at night, dancing across the empty fields. Old Pete at the general store told anyone who would listen about his grandfather's stories. Pete's grandfather had lived in the area since the 1920s. He remembered when prospectors came through looking for gold. Some of them had worked the land where the ranch now stood, but they all left suddenly one winter. No one knew why. Sarah had heard all these stories. At first she thought they were just small-town gossip, but after 3 years of trying to sell the ranch, she was starting to wonder. Maybe there really was something wrong with this place. She walked to the old farmhouse and pushed open the front door. The hinges squeaked loudly. Inside, dust covered everything. Sunlight came through holes in the roof, making bright spots on the dirty floor. The kitchen still had an old stove and refrigerator, but they had not worked in years. Sarah climbed the creaky stairs to the second floor. The bedrooms were small and dark. She opened a window to let in fresh air. From up here, she could see for miles across the empty land. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt lonely and sad. Back downstairs, Sarah noticed a door she had never opened before. It led to the basement. She found a light switch, but the electricity had been turned off long ago. Using her phone's flashlight, she went down the wooden steps. The basement was cold and damp. Stone walls surrounded her on all sides. In one corner, she saw old papers scattered on the floor. She picked up a few and tried to read them in the dim light. They looked like old maps and documents from many years ago. Sarah put the papers back where she found them. She was not here to look through old junk. She needed to find someone brave enough to buy this ranch. But who would want a place that had defeated so many others? The sun was getting low in the sky. Sarah walked back to her car, thinking about what to do next. Maybe she should tell her boss that this ranch would never sell. Maybe some places were just meant to stay empty. As she drove away, Sarah looked in her rearview mirror one last time. The old ranch house grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared behind a hill. She did not know that very soon, someone would come along who saw opportunity where others saw only failure. Someone who would discover that the greatest treasures are often hidden in the most unlikely places. Miguel Santos wiped the sweat from his face as he walked out of the ranch office for the last time. After 15 years of working for the Big Sky Cattle Company, his job was over. The company was moving their operations to Texas, where labor was cheaper. At 34 years old, Miguel had to start over again. He climbed into his old pickup truck and sat there for a moment. The truck was 12 years old and had over 200,000 miles on it. The paint was faded and there were dents on every side. But it still ran, and that was all that mattered. Miguel had learned not to waste money on things that looked pretty. Pretty things did not put food on the table. Miguel drove home to the small trailer where he lived with his wife Maria and their 2 children. 8-year-old Sofia was doing homework at the kitchen table. 5-year-old Carlos was playing with toy trucks on the floor. They looked up when their father walked in, but they could see from his face that something was wrong. Maria came out of the bedroom where she had been folding laundry. She took one look at Miguel and knew what had happened. He did not need to say anything. She had been expecting this day for months. The rumors about the company closing had been going around for a long time. That night, after the children went to bed, Miguel and Maria sat at their small kitchen table and counted their money. Miguel kept all their savings in a coffee can hidden behind the stove. He poured out the bills and coins and they counted together. $52,037. That was everything they had saved in 15 years of hard work. Miguel had come to America from Mexico when he was 19 years old. He crossed the border with nothing but the clothes on his back and a dream of making a better life for his family. He worked in fields picking vegetables. He cleaned barns and fixed fences. He learned English by watching television and asking questions. Every dollar he earned, he saved as much as he could. When Miguel met Maria, she was working as a housekeeper for a rich family in town. They got married and had their children. Maria stayed home to take care of Sofia and Carlos while Miguel worked at the cattle company. They lived simply and saved every penny they could. They dreamed of one day owning their own land. But now Miguel was out of work. There were not many jobs in their small Montana town. He could try to find work at another ranch, but most of them were cutting workers too. He could move the family to a big city, but he did not know anything except ranch work. And he was too old to start learning a completely new job. Miguel could not sleep that night. He lay in bed thinking about what to do. He had always been the kind of man who solved problems by working harder. But this problem could not be solved with hard work alone. He needed a plan. The next morning, Miguel drove into town to look for work. He stopped at every ranch and farm in the area. Most of the owners knew him and respected his work, but none of them had jobs to offer. Times were hard for everyone. At lunchtime, Miguel stopped at Betty's diner to get a cup of coffee. He only had enough money for coffee, not food. He sat at the counter and tried to think of what to do next. That is when he overheard 2 men talking at the table behind him. One man was complaining about a ranch he could not sell. Miguel listened as the man described the Blackstone Ranch. 2,400 acres for only $50,000. The man said no one wanted it because of some old stories about bad luck. But Miguel was not the kind of person who believed in luck, good or bad. He believed in hard work. Miguel turned around and introduced himself to the men. One of them was a banker named Mr. Peterson. The other was a real estate agent named Sarah Mitchell. Miguel asked them to tell him more about this ranch that no one wanted. Sarah looked surprised that anyone would be interested. She told Miguel about all the families who had failed trying to make the ranch work. She explained that the land seemed cursed or poisoned. She said the soil would not grow crops, and cattle got sick there. But Miguel heard something different in her words. He heard about 2,400 acres of land for the same amount of money he had in his coffee can. He had worked on ranches his whole life. He knew that with enough hard work and the right approach, any land could be made productive. Mr. Peterson shook his head when Miguel said he wanted to see the ranch. The banker had seen too many people lose their money on that property. He tried to warn Miguel about all the problems, but Miguel was determined. That afternoon, Miguel drove out to see the Blackstone Ranch. Sarah met him there, still trying to talk him out of buying it. As they walked around the property, she pointed out every problem: the broken fences, the dry well, the house with holes in the roof, the soil that looked gray and dead. Miguel saw all these problems too, but he also saw possibilities. The land was flat and good for grazing cattle. There were natural windbreaks from small hills. The house could be fixed with some work. New fences could be built. A well could be dug in a different spot. Most importantly, Miguel saw something the other buyers had not seen. They had all been rich people or big companies. They expected everything to be perfect right away. When problems came up, they threw money at them or gave up. Miguel was used to problems. He had been solving problems his whole life with his own two hands. Sarah was amazed when Miguel said he wanted to buy the ranch. She asked if he was sure. She made him promise to think about it for at least a week. Miguel shook his head. He had made up his mind. 2 weeks later, Miguel stood in the lawyer's office signing papers. He wrote a check for $52,000, almost every penny he had in the world. The lawyer kept asking if he was sure about this decision. Even Sarah looked worried as she handed him the keys. Miguel drove straight to the ranch. His ranch now. He parked his truck in front of the old farmhouse and sat there for a few minutes. The wind blew across the empty fields. The house looked even more run down than he remembered. But it was his. That evening, Miguel brought Maria and the children to see their new home. Maria cried when she saw the condition of the house. The children were excited to have so much space to run around, but they could see their mother was upset. Miguel put his arm around his wife and made her a promise. He would fix this place up and make it into the home they had always dreamed of. It would take time and a lot of hard work, but they would succeed where others had failed. As the sun set over the Blackstone Ranch, Miguel had no idea that he had just bought much more than 2,400 acres of land. Hidden beneath his feet was a secret that would change his family's life forever. But first he had a lot of work to do. Miguel's first month on the ranch was harder than he had expected. Every morning he woke up before sunrise and worked until dark. The house needed so many repairs that he did not know where to start. He began with the roof because winter was coming, and his family needed a dry place to sleep. Maria tried her best to clean the inside of the house, but without running water, everything was difficult. She had to drive to town every few days to fill up water jugs at the gas station. The children helped as much as they could, but they missed their friends from town. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. Miguel's biggest problem was water. The old well had been dry for years. He tried digging it deeper, but still found no water. Without water, he could not grow crops or raise cattle. He began to worry that maybe the other families had been right to give up on this place. One day, while looking for a good spot to dig a new well, Miguel noticed something strange about the land. In several places there were piles of rocks that did not look natural. They were stacked too neatly, as if someone had put them there on purpose. Miguel had seen similar rock piles when he worked at other old ranches. Usually they marked property lines or special places. Miguel decided to explore these rock piles more carefully. The largest one was about half a mile from the house, near a small hill. When he looked closer, he could see that the rocks had been placed there many years ago. Some of them had strange marks carved into them. The marks looked like arrows pointing in different directions. That evening, Miguel walked over to visit his nearest neighbor, Tom Brennan. Tom was 78 years old and had lived in the area his whole life. His family had owned the land next to the Blackstone Ranch for 3 generations. If anyone knew the history of Miguel's land, it would be Tom. Tom invited Miguel into his kitchen for coffee. The old man was happy to have someone to talk to. He did not get many visitors. Miguel asked about the rock piles on his property. Tom's face changed when he heard the question. He looked serious and a little worried. Tom told Miguel that his grandfather had shared stories about those rocks when Tom was a young boy. According to the old stories, gold miners had put those rocks there in the 1880s. Back then, Montana was full of people looking for gold. Some of them had worked the land that was now Miguel's ranch. The miners had come from California during the gold rush there. When California gold became harder to find, many miners moved north to Montana. They set up camps and dug holes all over the territory. Some found gold and became rich. Others found nothing and went home poor. Tom's grandfather remembered one group of miners who worked Miguel's land in 1887. There were about 12 men in the group. They came in the spring and worked all summer. Unlike other miners who gave up quickly, this group stayed longer than most. They seemed to think they had found something valuable. But then winter came early that year. The snow started falling in October and did not stop. The miners were not prepared for such a harsh winter. They packed up their equipment and left quickly. Tom's grandfather never saw them again. The strange part of the story was what happened after the miners left. Tom's grandfather found some of their equipment still buried under the snow. There were shovels and pickaxes and other tools. But there were also papers and maps that the miners had left behind. The papers showed they had been digging in several different spots around the ranch. Tom got up from the table and went to an old wooden chest in his living room. He came back with a yellowed piece of paper. It was a hand-drawn map that his grandfather had saved all these years. The map showed the area around both ranches, with X marks in several spots on Miguel's land. Miguel studied the map carefully. The X marks matched the locations where he had found the rock piles. There were also notes written in faded pencil along the edges of the map. Most of the writing was too old to read clearly, but Miguel could make out a few words. One note said, "Rich vein here." Another said, "Dig deeper." Tom let Miguel borrow the old map to study at home. The old man warned Miguel to be careful if he decided to do any digging. Old mine shafts could be dangerous. They could cave in without warning, and there might be bad air or water down there that could make someone sick. That night, Miguel spread the map out on his kitchen table. Maria looked over his shoulder as he compared the drawing to his own mental picture of their land. The largest X on the map was right where Miguel had found the biggest pile of rocks. There were 3 smaller X marks scattered around the property. Miguel had never thought much about gold before. He was a practical man who believed in raising cattle and growing crops. But the map made him curious. Why had the miners marked these spots? What had they found that made them think there was gold there? Miguel decided to do some research. The next day, he drove to the town library and asked the librarian about the history of gold mining in the area. She showed him several old books and newspaper articles from the 1880s. Miguel was amazed to learn how many gold mines had operated in Montana during that time. One article from 1887 caught his attention. It was about a group of miners who had found gold near what was now Miguel's ranch. The article said they had discovered promising deposits, but had to abandon their claim due to severe winter conditions. The article mentioned that the miners planned to return the following spring, but there were no more articles about them after that. Miguel also learned about mining laws. In Montana, if you owned land, you also owned the rights to any minerals found under that land. That meant if there really was gold on his ranch, it legally belonged to him. But Miguel was still not sure if he believed there was actually gold there. The stories seemed too good to be true. Over the next few days, Miguel could not stop thinking about the map and the rock piles. He found himself walking to those spots during his lunch breaks. Each time he looked more carefully at the ground. In some places, he could see areas where the earth had been disturbed long ago. There were small depressions that might have been old digging sites. At the largest rock pile, Miguel noticed something he had missed before. Partly hidden under years of fallen leaves and dirt, there was a piece of old wood. When he cleaned it off, he could see that it was a wooden stake with letters carved into it. The letters were so worn that Miguel could barely read them, but they looked like Claim 7. Miguel's heart started beating faster. A mining claim marker was legal proof that miners had worked this exact spot. It meant the stories Tom's grandfather had told were probably true. Gold miners really had been here, and they had thought this spot was worth marking and claiming. That evening, Miguel showed the wooden stake to Maria. She could see how excited her husband was getting about these old mining stories. Maria was a practical woman, just like Miguel. She worried that he was starting to dream about finding gold instead of focusing on the real work of fixing up their ranch. Maria reminded Miguel that they had used almost all their money to buy this land. They needed to find a way to make the ranch profitable soon, or they would lose everything. Dreaming about gold that might not even exist was dangerous. Miguel knew his wife was right, but he also could not ignore what he had found. The evidence was right there in front of him. Old maps, mining claim markers, and stories from people who had lived here for generations. Something had brought those miners to his land, and something had made them mark specific spots as valuable. Miguel made a decision. He would continue working on the house and the ranch during the day. But in his spare time, he would investigate these mining sites more carefully. He would be smart about it and not spend money they could not afford to lose. But he had to know what secrets his land might be hiding. As Miguel lay in bed that night, listening to the wind blow across his property, he wondered what the morning might bring. He had no idea that he was about to make a discovery that would change everything. Miguel had been working on his ranch for 6 months when he finally decided to dig a new well. The family was tired of driving to town for water every few days. Miguel had saved up enough money to rent a small digging machine for the weekend. He planned to dig near the house where it would be easy to run pipes inside. On Saturday morning, Miguel started the machine and began digging. The soil was harder than he expected. After 2 hours, he had only dug down 3 feet. The machine kept hitting rocks and roots. Miguel was getting frustrated and worried about how much this was going to cost. Then the digger hit something that made a loud clang. Miguel thought he had hit a big rock. He shut off the machine and climbed down into the hole to see what was blocking his way. When he brushed away the dirt, he saw something metal sticking up from the ground. Miguel dug around the metal object with his hands. It was not a rock at all. It was an old iron box about the size of a shoebox. The metal was rusty and covered with dirt, but the box was still in one piece. Miguel carefully lifted it out of the hole and set it on the ground. The box was heavier than Miguel expected. There was an old lock on the front, but the metal was so rusty that Miguel could break it off with his shovel. His hands were shaking as he opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in what used to be cloth, Miguel found papers, a small leather pouch, and something that made his heart stop beating. Gold nuggets. Real gold nuggets, about the size of marbles. Miguel counted 12 of them, in the leather pouch. They were heavy and had the dull yellow color that Miguel had seen in pictures. But these were real, sitting right there in his hands. Miguel sat down hard on the ground and stared at what he had found. He looked around to make sure no one could see him. His nearest neighbor was miles away, but Miguel suddenly felt like the whole world was watching. He quickly put everything back in the box and carried it into his house. Maria was in the kitchen making lunch when Miguel came inside with the dirty metal box. She asked what he had found. Miguel set the box on the table and opened it without saying a word. When Maria saw the gold nuggets, she gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. The children came running when they heard their mother's reaction. Sofia and Carlos stared at the shiny rocks with wide eyes. Carlos reached out to touch one, but Miguel gently moved his hand away. These were not toys. These might be the answer to all their problems. After lunch, when the children were playing outside, Miguel and Maria looked through the papers from the box. Most of them were so old and damaged that the writing was hard to read. But one paper was in better condition than the others. It was a hand-drawn map, much more detailed than the one Tom's grandfather had saved. The map showed the area around Miguel's ranch with incredible detail. Every hill, stream, and rock formation was carefully drawn. There were notes written all around the edges in different handwriting. Some notes were in English, but others were in a language Miguel did not recognize. The most interesting part of the map was a large X marked right where Miguel had been digging his well. Next to the X, someone had written, "Main site, rich vein below, dig deeper for mother lode." Miguel's heart started racing again. The gold nuggets in the box might just be a small sample of something much bigger. Another paper in the box appeared, to be a letter. The ink was faded, but Miguel could read most of it. The letter was dated September 15, 1887, and was written by someone named William Morrison to his brother back east. The letter described finding gold on this land and making plans to dig a proper mine shaft. William wrote about how rich the gold deposits were and how they were going to make the family wealthy. But he also wrote about problems with early winter weather and running out of supplies. The letter ended with William saying they would have to leave their equipment and return in the spring with more men and better tools. Miguel read the letter 3 times to make sure he understood it correctly. According to William Morrison, there was much more gold still in the ground. The nuggets in the box were just what they had found on the surface. The real treasure was deeper underground. That evening, Miguel walked to the spot where he had found the box. He looked at the hole he had been digging for his well. It was only 3 feet deep. According to the map and the letter, he needed to dig much deeper to find the main gold deposit. But Miguel was not a miner. He did not know how to dig a proper mine shaft. Miguel spent the next few days researching gold mining on the internet at the town library. He learned about different ways to dig for gold and how to tell if ore contained valuable metals. He also learned about the laws governing gold mining on private property in Montana. The good news was that Miguel owned the mineral rights to his land. Any gold he found legally belonged to him. The bad news was that mining was dangerous and expensive. Professional mining equipment cost thousands of dollars, and if Miguel found a lot of gold, he would have to pay taxes on it and follow environmental regulations. Miguel also learned that he should have the gold nuggets tested to make sure they were real. There were places that would test gold and tell him exactly how pure it was and what it was worth. But Miguel was nervous about taking the nuggets to be tested. He did not want word to get out about what he had found. Finally, Miguel decided to drive to a gold dealer in a city 3 hours away. He told Maria he was going to buy supplies for the ranch. He put 3 of the smallest nuggets in his pocket and left the rest hidden in his house. The gold dealer was an old man named Frank who had been buying and selling gold for 30 years. Miguel nervously showed him the 3 nuggets and asked if they were real. Frank looked at them with a magnifying glass and tested them with acid. After a few minutes, Frank smiled and nodded his head. The nuggets were real gold, and they were very pure. Frank offered to buy all 3 for $800. Miguel's hand started shaking again. $800 for 3 small nuggets. He had 9 more nuggets at home, plus whatever else might be buried on his land. Miguel told Frank he needed to think about it and would come back later. On the drive home, Miguel's mind was racing. If 3 small nuggets were worth $800, the 9 larger ones at home might be worth several thousand. And if there really was more gold underground, Miguel might have found something that could change his family's life forever. When Miguel got home, he sat down with Maria and told her everything. They looked at the map again and talked about what to do next. Maria was excited but also scared. She had grown up poor and knew that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. Miguel understood his wife's concerns, but he also knew they had to investigate further. They had used almost all their money to buy this ranch. If there really was gold underground, it could solve all their financial problems. But if they did nothing and just hoped for the best, they might miss the opportunity of a lifetime. Miguel made a decision. He would continue working on the ranch during the day to keep up appearances. But early in the morning, before sunrise, he would start digging deeper in the spot where he found the box. He would work quietly and carefully. If he found more gold, he would figure out what to do next. If he found nothing, at least he would know for sure. That night, Miguel could barely sleep. He kept thinking about William Morrison's letter and the phrase mother lode. In gold mining, the mother lode was the main source of gold in an area. If Miguel had found the mother lode that the 1887 miners had been looking for, he might be sitting on top of a fortune. Miguel had always believed that hard work was the key to success. Now he was about to discover if luck could be just as important. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Miguel dreamed about digging deeper into the earth and finding more gold than he could ever imagine. Miguel woke up at 4 in the morning every day for the next 2 weeks. While his family slept, he quietly grabbed his tools and walked to the spot where he had found the iron box. He had decided to dig deeper, but he had to be very careful. If any of his neighbors saw him digging at such an early hour, they might ask questions he was not ready to answer. Miguel started digging by hand with a shovel. The work was slow and hard. Every morning, he could only dig for about 2 hours, before the sun came up and his family woke up. After 2 weeks, he had dug down about 8 feet. The hole was getting too deep to climb in and out of safely. On the 3rd week, Miguel found something that made his heart race. About 9 feet down, his shovel hit something hard. Miguel thought it was another rock, but when he cleaned away the dirt, he found old wooden boards. The wood was dark and rotted, but Miguel could see that someone had built something here long ago. Miguel dug more carefully around the wooden boards. Soon he realized what he had found. It was the top of an old wooden structure like a frame or a roof. The miners from 1887 had built something here and then covered it up when they left. Miguel was looking at the entrance to their mine. Miguel's hands were shaking as he pulled away more boards. Underneath, there was a dark hole going down into the earth. Miguel shined his flashlight into the hole and could see that it went much deeper than he had dug. The walls were lined with more wooden boards to keep the dirt from falling in. Miguel knew he should not go down into the old mine shaft alone. It could be dangerous. The air might be bad, or the walls might collapse. But his curiosity was stronger than his fear. He tied a rope around his waist and anchored it to his truck. Then he slowly lowered himself down into the hole. The mine shaft was about 15 feet deep. At the bottom, Miguel found a small room that the miners had carved out of the earth. The walls were still supported by old wooden beams, but some of them looked like they might fall down soon. Miguel had to duck his head to stand up in the low space. Miguel shined his flashlight around the underground room. In one corner, he saw old mining tools that had been left behind. There were pickaxes, shovels, and buckets. In another corner, he found something even more interesting. Someone had been digging a tunnel that led deeper into the earth. Miguel followed the tunnel for about 20 feet. It was very narrow and he had to crawl on his hands and knees. At the end of the tunnel, Miguel found what the miners had been looking for. The wall was full of white quartz rock shot through with thin lines of gold. Miguel had never seen anything like it. The gold was not in nuggets like he had found in the box. Instead, it was mixed into the rock in thin veins that sparkled in his flashlight beam. Miguel used his knife to scrape some of the gold from the rock. It came off easily and felt heavy. In his hand, Miguel crawled back through the tunnel and climbed out of the mine shaft. His heart was beating so fast he thought he might have a heart attack. He sat on the ground next to his truck and tried to calm down. What he had just seen could not be real. There could not be that much gold just sitting underground on his property. Miguel looked at the small pieces of gold he had scraped from the wall. In the morning sunlight, they looked even more beautiful than they had underground. Miguel put them in his pocket and covered up the mine shaft with boards and dirt. He did not want anyone to accidentally fall in, and he especially did not want anyone to discover what was down there. When Miguel got home, Maria was making breakfast. She could tell immediately that something had happened. Miguel was covered in dirt and looked like he had seen a ghost. Miguel sat down at the kitchen table and pulled the gold pieces from his pocket. Miguel told Maria about finding the old mine shaft and the gold veins in the rock. Maria listened with her mouth open. She picked up one of the gold pieces and held it up to the light. It was definitely real gold, but neither of them knew how much it might be worth. Miguel and Maria decided they needed to learn more about gold mining before they did anything else. Miguel could not keep crawling around in old mine shafts by himself. It was too dangerous, and they needed to understand what they had found and what it might be worth. Miguel drove back to the city to talk to Frank, the gold dealer. This time Miguel brought some of the gold he had scraped from the mine wall. Frank tested it with his equipment and gave Miguel some shocking news. This gold was very pure and very valuable. Even the small amount Miguel had brought was worth over $2,000. Frank asked Miguel where he had found such high-quality gold. Miguel said it came from his property, but did not give any details. Frank told Miguel that gold like this usually came from the main vein of a gold mine. If Miguel had found the source, there could be a lot more where it came from. On the drive home, Miguel stopped at a bookstore and bought every book he could find about gold mining. He also bought books about mining law and mineral rights. That evening, Miguel and Maria read about gold mining until late at night. Miguel learned that what he had found was called a lode mine. The gold was mixed into quartz rock deep underground. This was different from placer mining, where people looked for gold nuggets in streams and rivers. Lode mining was much more difficult and dangerous, but it could also be much more profitable. Miguel also learned about something called assaying. This was the process of testing ore to see exactly how much gold it contained and what it was worth. Professional miners always had their ore assayed before they started digging. Miguel realized he needed to have his gold tested by experts. The next day, Miguel collected more samples from different parts of the mine. He was very careful to mark exactly where each sample came from. Then he drove to the state university, which had a geology department that did mineral testing. The geology professor who tested Miguel's samples was amazed by what he found. The ore contained more gold than most commercial mines. If Miguel's property really contained a large deposit of ore this rich, it could be worth millions of dollars. Miguel asked the professor to keep the test results confidential. He said he was doing research for a friend and did not want word to get out yet. The professor agreed and gave Miguel a written report showing exactly how much gold was in each sample. When Miguel got home, he and Maria studied the test results. According to the university laboratory, Miguel's ore contained an average of 3 ounces of gold per ton of rock. That was incredibly rich. Most commercial gold mines were profitable with ore that contained less than 1 ounce per ton. Miguel did some quick math based on what he had seen in the mine. If the gold vein was as big as it appeared to be, and if it was all as rich as the samples he had tested, Miguel might be sitting on top of $20 or $30 million worth of gold. Miguel and Maria sat in their kitchen staring at the test results. They had gone from worrying about paying their bills to potentially being millionaires. But they also realized that their problems were just beginning. How do you dig up millions of dollars worth of gold without anyone noticing? How do you sell it legally? How do you keep it secret until you figure out what to do? Miguel looked out the window at his property. 6 months ago, everyone said this land was worthless. Now Miguel knew it might be one of the richest gold mines in Montana. But he also knew that with great treasure came great danger. If word got out about what he had found, he might lose everything. Miguel made another decision. He would continue his research and learn everything he could about gold mining. He would figure out the legal and safe way to extract the gold. And he would be very, very careful about who he trusted with his secret. Miguel had no idea that the hardest part of his journey was just beginning. Finding the gold had been easy compared to what came next. Miguel spent the next month learning everything he could about gold mining. He read books, watched videos on the internet, and even took an online course about mining safety. The more he learned, the more he realized how dangerous it would be to work in the old mine shaft alone. The biggest problem was that the mine was over 100 years old. The wooden supports were rotting and could collapse at any time. The air underground might be poisonous from gases that had built up over the years. And if Miguel got hurt down there, no one would know where to find him. Miguel also learned that he needed special permits to operate a gold mine. Even though the gold was on his own property, he had to follow state and federal laws about mining. There were rules about safety, environmental protection, and reporting what he found. Breaking these laws could get him in serious trouble. But Miguel also discovered something that gave him hope. Small-scale mining operations could sometimes get permits more easily than big commercial mines. If Miguel kept his operation small and followed all the rules, he might be able to work legally. Miguel decided he needed help from experts. He found a mining consultant named Dave Richardson who worked with small mining operations all over Montana. Dave had 30 years of experience and knew all the laws and regulations. Miguel called Dave and asked him to come take a look at his property. When Dave arrived, Miguel was nervous about showing him the mine, but he knew he could not do this alone. Miguel led Dave to the spot where he had been digging and carefully removed the boards covering the mine shaft. Dave looked down into the hole with his flashlight and whistled softly. He could see immediately that this was a serious mining operation from the 1800s. Dave put on a hard hat and safety gear and went down to examine the underground workings. When Dave came back up, his face was excited, but also concerned. He told Miguel that the gold deposit was definitely real and very valuable, but he also said the old mine was extremely dangerous. The wooden supports were failing, and the whole thing could collapse without warning. Dave explained that if Miguel wanted to work this mine safely, he would need to invest in proper equipment and safety measures. That meant installing new supports, bringing in fresh air, and having emergency escape routes. All of this would cost a lot of money. Miguel asked Dave to estimate how much it would cost to make the mine safe and operational. Dave said it would probably cost around $50,000 to do it right. Miguel's heart sank. He had already spent most of his money buying the ranch. He did not have $50,000 for mining equipment. But Dave had another suggestion. Instead of trying to make the old mine safe, Miguel could start his own small operation. He could dig his own shafts and tunnels using modern techniques. This would be safer and might even cost less than fixing the old mine. Dave also told Miguel about the legal requirements. Miguel would need to file mining claims with the state, get environmental permits, and set up a legal business structure. Dave offered to help Miguel with all the paperwork for a fee of $5,000. Miguel did not have $5,000 either. But Dave made him an offer. Dave would help Miguel get started in exchange for a small percentage of the gold they found. This way, Miguel would not have to pay anything up front, and Dave would only make money if the mine was successful. Miguel talked it over with Maria. They both liked Dave and trusted him. Dave seemed honest and knowledgeable, and his offer meant they could move forward without spending money they did not have. Miguel and Dave shook hands on their partnership. Over the next 6 weeks, Dave helped Miguel file all the necessary paperwork. They registered Miguel's mining claims with the state of Montana. They applied for environmental permits and safety inspections. They set up a small business called Santos Mining Company, with Miguel as the owner and Dave as the consultant. While they waited for the permits to be approved, Miguel and Dave began planning their mining operation. Dave brought in a soil expert to test different areas of Miguel's property. They wanted to find the richest deposits of gold and the safest places to dig. The soil expert found gold traces in several locations around the ranch, but the richest area was exactly where Miguel had found the old mine. It appeared that the miners from 1887 had been very good at finding gold. They had located the heart of the deposit. Dave designed a plan for a small, safe mining operation. Instead of working in the dangerous old mine, they would dig new shafts nearby. They would use modern equipment and safety procedures. The operation would employ 3 or 4 workers and extract gold slowly and carefully. Miguel was amazed by how complicated gold mining really was. It was not just digging holes in the ground. There were environmental studies, safety inspections, tax planning, and equipment leasing. Dave handled most of this, but Miguel tried to understand everything. The permits were approved in early spring. Miguel was now legally authorized to operate a small gold mine on his property. Dave brought in the first piece of equipment, a small excavator for digging test shafts. Miguel's first day as an official gold miner was exciting and terrifying. He operated the excavator while Dave supervised and guided him. They dug their first test shaft about 20 feet from the old mine entrance. At 15 feet deep, they hit the gold-bearing quartz rock. Miguel had seen it before in the old mine, but this time felt different. This time it was legal and safe and organized. Miguel scooped up a bucket of the gold ore and could hardly believe this was really happening. Dave took samples of the ore to a certified laboratory for professional assaying. The results came back even better than Miguel had hoped. This particular area contained an average of 4 ounces of gold per ton of rock. At current gold prices, that made each ton of rock worth over $8,000. Dave estimated that Miguel's property contained at least 3,000 tons of gold-bearing ore that could be safely extracted. If their estimates were correct, Miguel was sitting on top of $24 million worth of gold. Miguel and Maria could barely sleep that night. $24 million was more money than they could even imagine. Miguel had grown up in poverty and worked hard his whole life just to get by. Now he might become one of the richest men in Montana. But Dave warned Miguel not to get too excited yet. Extracting the gold would take time and careful work. They had to follow all the safety and environmental rules. They had to pay taxes on everything they found. And they had to keep the operation quiet to avoid attracting unwanted attention. Dave suggested that they start with a very small extraction to test their procedures and equipment. If everything went well, they could gradually increase the size of the operation. The goal was to extract about $50,000 worth of gold in the first year. Miguel agreed with this conservative approach. He had learned to be patient and careful over the years. He would rather take his time and do things right than rush and make mistakes. Besides, even $50,000 would solve all of his immediate financial problems. Miguel hired his first employee, a young man named Jake, who had experience working in mines. Jake was quiet and trustworthy, and Dave had worked with him before. Miguel also bought basic mining equipment including safety gear, lighting, and ore processing tools. As summer began, Miguel looked out over his property with new eyes. 6 months ago, this had been worthless land that no one wanted. Now it was the site of what might become one of the most profitable small mines in the state. Miguel thought about all the people who had owned this land before him and failed to make it work. They had been looking for success in cattle and crops. Miguel had found it underground, hidden where no one thought to look. But Miguel also knew that the real work was just beginning. Finding gold was only the first step. Now he had to extract it safely, sell it legally, and manage the money wisely. Miguel was about to learn that becoming rich brought its own challenges and dangers. Miguel's first year as a gold miner was harder than he had expected. Even with Dave's help and all the proper permits, extracting gold safely was slow and expensive work. Every day brought new challenges that Miguel had never thought about. The biggest challenge was keeping the operation secret. Miguel lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. People noticed when trucks started coming to his ranch carrying mining equipment. They asked questions when Miguel hired workers and started paying them good wages. Miguel told people he was starting a small gravel operation. He said he was digging up rocks to sell for construction projects. This explanation seemed to satisfy most of his neighbors. But Miguel could tell that some people were suspicious about what he was really doing. Miguel's second challenge was the weather. Montana winters were harsh, and it was impossible to mine outdoors when the ground was frozen solid. Miguel could only work from April through October. That gave him just 6 months each year to extract gold. Dave helped Miguel design an indoor processing facility in one of the old ranch buildings. During the winter months, Miguel and his workers could crush ore and extract gold from rock they had dug up during the summer. This allowed them to work year-round, but it also required more equipment and electricity. Miguel's third challenge was taxes. Every ounce of gold he extracted had to be reported to the government. Miguel owed federal income tax, state income tax, and local property taxes on his mining operation. Dave connected Miguel with an accountant who specialized in mining businesses. The accountant explained that Miguel would owe about 40% of his gold revenue in various taxes. This was much more than Miguel had expected. It meant that if he extracted $100,000 worth of gold, he would only keep about $60,000 after paying taxes. But even with all these challenges and expenses, Miguel's mining operation was profitable. In his first 6 months of legal mining, Miguel extracted about $80,000 worth of gold. After paying taxes, expenses, and his workers, Miguel kept about $30,000 in profit. $30,000 was more money than Miguel had ever made in a single year. It was enough to fix up his house, buy new equipment for the ranch, and put money in the bank for his children's education. Miguel and Maria felt rich, even though they knew they were just getting started. Miguel was very careful about how he spent his new wealth. He did not want his neighbors to notice sudden changes in his lifestyle. Miguel bought a slightly newer pickup truck, but nothing fancy. He fixed the roof on his house and installed running water, but he did not build anything that would attract attention. Miguel also started investing his profits wisely. Dave introduced him to a financial advisor who helped Miguel open investment accounts and plan for the future. Miguel learned about stocks, bonds, and retirement savings. He wanted to make sure his family would be secure even after the gold was gone. By his second year of mining, Miguel had established a smooth and efficient operation. He employed 4 workers, including Jake, who had become his foreman. The workers signed confidentiality agreements promising not to talk about exactly what they were mining or how much they were finding. Miguel's workers were loyal because he paid them well and treated them fairly. Most small mines in Montana paid minimum wage and offered no benefits. Miguel paid above market wages and provided health insurance for his employees. Happy workers were less likely to gossip about the operation. Miguel also invested in better equipment. He bought a small crusher for processing ore and a smelting furnace for purifying gold. These machines allowed Miguel to extract more gold from each ton of rock and to work more efficiently. In his second year, Miguel extracted about $200,000 worth of gold. His profit after all expenses and taxes was about $80,000. Miguel was now making more money than most doctors and lawyers in his area. But Miguel's success created new problems. The more gold he extracted, the more attention he attracted from government agencies. Environmental inspectors visited his mine regularly to make sure he was following all the rules. Tax auditors reviewed his books to verify that he was reporting all his income. Miguel also started worrying about crime. Word was getting out that there was a successful mining operation on the old Blackstone Ranch. Miguel heard rumors in town about people discussing his business. He started locking his gates and installing security cameras around his property. One night, Miguel caught 2 men trying to sneak onto his ranch with metal detectors. Miguel called the sheriff and had them arrested for trespassing. The men claimed they were just hobbyists looking for old coins, but Miguel suspected they knew about the gold. Miguel decided he needed better security. He hired a security company to patrol his property at night. He also bought a guard dog and installed motion sensor lights around all the buildings. These precautions were expensive, but Miguel knew he had to protect his operation. Miguel's biggest security concern was what to do with the gold he extracted. He could not keep large amounts of gold at his house or in the mine buildings, but he also could not sell it all immediately without attracting attention. Dave helped Miguel find secure storage for his gold. There was a specialized facility in the city that stored precious metals for miners and investors. Miguel rented a safety deposit box large enough to hold several months' worth of gold production. Miguel also spread his gold sales across multiple dealers in different cities. Instead of selling everything to Frank, Miguel found 4 different buyers who each purchased smaller amounts. This reduced the chance that any one dealer would talk about Miguel's large sales. By his 3rd year of mining, Miguel had extracted over $500,000 worth of gold. He was now one of the wealthiest men in his county, though almost no one knew it. Miguel continued to live modestly and work hard to maintain the appearance of a struggling rancher. Miguel used his profits to expand the ranch operation as well as the mine. He bought cattle and started raising crops in the parts of his land that were not being mined. This gave him legitimate ranch income to explain his improving lifestyle. Miguel also started planning for the future. The gold deposit was large, but it would not last forever. Miguel estimated that he could continue mining profitably for about 10 more years. After that, he would need other sources of income. Miguel invested his mining profits in real estate, stocks, and other businesses. He bought rental properties in town and invested in a construction company. By the time the gold ran out, Miguel planned to have enough other investments to support his family comfortably. Miguel's transformation from poor ranch hand to wealthy mine owner had taken 3 years. But Miguel knew that the hardest part might still be ahead. Managing wealth was just as difficult as earning it. Miguel had to make sure his success did not destroy the simple life he and his family valued. As Miguel looked back on his journey, he was amazed by how much his life had changed. 3 years ago, he had been desperate and almost broke. Now he was on track to become a multimillionaire. But Miguel never forgot that his success had started with hard work, careful planning, and the courage to take a chance on land that nobody else wanted. Miguel also never forgot how important it was to stay humble and grateful. He had been blessed with incredible luck, but he knew that luck meant nothing without the wisdom to use it well. Miguel was determined to be a good steward of his wealth and to use it to help others as well as his own family. 18 months after Miguel had discovered the gold mine, his life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. Santos Mining Company had become one of the most successful small mining operations in Montana. Miguel had extracted over $23 million worth of gold from the land that everyone else had thought was worthless. Miguel now employed 12 people at his mining operation. In addition to the miners, he had hired an office manager, a security supervisor, and a full-time accountant. The old Blackstone Ranch had been transformed from an abandoned property into a thriving business that supported dozens of families in the community. But Miguel had been smart about managing his success. Instead of spending all his money on expensive toys and luxury items, he had invested most of his profits in long-term assets that would provide income for generations. Miguel now owned rental properties, farmland, restaurant franchises, and stocks in major corporations. Miguel had also used his wealth to give back to his community. He established the Santos Family Foundation, which provided college scholarships for immigrant children and low-income families. The foundation had already helped 30 young people attend university who otherwise could not have afforded it. Miguel donated money to build a new community center in town and to upgrade the local elementary school. He sponsored youth sports, teams, and provided funding for the volunteer fire department. Miguel believed that his success should benefit everyone in the community, not just his own family. The ranch itself had been completely renovated. Miguel built a beautiful new house for his family, but he was careful not to make it too fancy. He wanted a comfortable home, not a mansion that would make his neighbors uncomfortable. The house had modern appliances and reliable heating, but it still looked like it belonged on a working ranch. Miguel had also restored the ranch's agricultural operations. He now ran 500 head of cattle and grew hay and grain on parts of his land that were not being mined. The ranch was profitable on its own, separate from the mining operation. This gave Miguel a legitimate source of income that explained his improved lifestyle to anyone who asked. Miguel's children were thriving in their new circumstances. Sofia, now 11 years old, was an excellent student who dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. Carlos, 8 years old, loved working with the cattle and wanted to be a rancher like his father. Miguel made sure both children understood the value of hard work and did not take their family's success for granted. Maria had become involved in local charities and community organizations. She used her time and Miguel's money to help other immigrant families adjust to life in Montana. Maria organized English language classes, job training programs, and cultural events that brought the community together. Miguel's mining operation continued to be profitable, but he had learned to balance production with sustainability. Instead of extracting gold as quickly as possible, Miguel maintained a steady pace that would allow the mine to operate for many years. He employed environmental scientists to make sure his mining activities did not damage the land or water. Miguel had also become an advocate for responsible mining practices. He spoke at industry conferences and worked with government agencies to develop better regulations for small-scale mining operations. Miguel wanted to prove that mining could be done safely and profitably while respecting the environment. The secret of Miguel's gold mine was no longer completely secret, but Miguel had managed the revelation carefully. Word had gradually spread that the old Blackstone Ranch was now a successful mining operation, but most people assumed it was a gravel or aggregate business. Only a few trusted advisors knew the full extent of Miguel's gold discovery. Miguel had learned important lessons about managing wealth and success. He discovered that having money brought new responsibilities and challenges. People constantly approached him asking for loans, investments, or donations. Miguel had to learn to say no to requests that were not wise or legitimate. Miguel also learned that wealth could change relationships with friends and family. Some people treated him differently once they knew he was rich. Others became jealous or resentful of his success. Miguel worked hard to maintain the authentic relationships that had sustained him when he was poor. One of Miguel's biggest challenges was preparing his children for their inheritance. Miguel and Maria did not want Sofia and Carlos to become spoiled or entitled. They insisted that both children continue to work hard in school and help with ranch chores. Miguel planned to require his children to earn college degrees and work for several years before they could access their trust funds. Miguel had also thought carefully about what would happen to the mining operation in the future. The gold deposit was large enough to continue producing for at least another 15 years. Miguel planned to pass ownership of the mine to his children when they were old enough to manage it responsibly. But Miguel also knew that the gold would not last forever. He had invested his mining profits in assets that would provide income long after the last ounce of gold was extracted. Miguel's real estate investments, business partnerships, and stock portfolio were worth more than the remaining gold in the ground. Miguel often thought about the irony of his success. For over 20 years, 5 different families had owned the Blackstone Ranch and failed to make it profitable. They had all focused on traditional ranching and farming. None of them had looked underground for the treasure that had been there all along. Miguel also thought about the miners from 1887 who had first discovered the gold deposit. They had been so close to incredible wealth, but bad weather and poor planning had forced them to abandon their claims. If they had been able to stay just one more season, they might have extracted millions of dollars worth of gold. Miguel made sure to honor the memory of those early miners. He erected a small monument near the original mine shaft with a plaque that recognized their discovery. Miguel also researched their names and histories, learning about the men who had first realized the potential of his land. As Miguel looked toward the future, he felt grateful for the incredible journey that had brought him from poverty to wealth. But he also felt the weight of responsibility that came with his success. Miguel was determined to use his money wisely and to leave a positive legacy for his children and his community. Miguel's story had become legendary in Montana mining circles. People talked about the poor immigrant who had bought worthless land and discovered a fortune underneath it. But Miguel knew that his real success was not just finding gold. His real success was what he had done with the opportunity. Miguel had transformed not just his own life but the lives of everyone around him. His employees had good jobs with fair wages. His community had benefited from his generous donations. His children had opportunities that Miguel could never have imagined when he was growing up. The Blackstone Ranch would never again be the cursed, worthless property that no one wanted. Under Miguel's ownership, it had become a symbol of hope and possibility. Miguel had proven that with hard work, careful planning, and a little bit of luck, even the most unlikely dreams could come true. Miguel Santos had found much more than gold on his ranch. He had found a new life, a bright future, and the satisfaction that comes from success honestly earned and wisely used. The land that nobody wanted had given Miguel everything he had ever wanted, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure that treasure was shared with others.